And it's the life cycle of many, many Jews' interaction with their religion. Very often when the hatch comes along, when the children come into the picture, they are redrawn to their faith, albeit for just traditional reasons. And yet when one reads the distance, the extent to which Ella and Richard had drifted away from their religion, it was never more poignantly expressed than when describing the total lack of transmission of that heritage to but this narrative, I believe, is very much the narrative of many. It is the narrative of many, many Jews who find their way to religion through all different avenues which they never ever would have foreseen. I know in the colloquial, in the English terminology, the lexicon in which we use, we call it coincidence. What an amazing string of coincidences that brought her to where it brought her. But in rabbinic terminology, as Rabbi Rabinovich would have put it, we have a different term for it, and it's called divine providence. It was divinely providential that she would end up where she ended up, that she would have ultimately, step after step, cause after effect, embraced her own religion, with tears streaming from her eyes. Spilled down my cheeks as she was standing at the Western Wall as I said my own prayer. That my son would find his link with his Jewish past and present. Ella created that link. She built that bridge. She filled that void between herself and her children. Gabe, he had had his own path in life. He was elsewhere. But Anton, a young Jewish boy who was involved with the wrong crowd, has now found his place in his people. Anton would probably then, if there's a sequel, and I may be a little bit presumptuous, would probably then go, hint, hint, Joan. And a free copy of that one would also be appreciated. If there was a sequel, Anton would probably have gone back to shul, back to Rabbi Rabinovich, and if I was Rabbi Rabinovich, I'd embrace him with both arms. I wouldn't embrace Ella, because I'd lose my job if I tried, but gender sensitivities. Anton would have come to shul, he would have put on his kippah, he would have been called up to the Torah, and he would have celebrated his bar mitzvah. And then perhaps his involvement would go far beyond the hatch, match, and dispatch. His involvement would have been reignited, his connection and his fire of Judaism within his heart, by his loving mother Ella, who didn't just suffice with the transformation for herself, but carried it on to the next generation. I thank you very much for hearing me out and my observations of the book, and with no further ado, it is my absolute privilege, having launched the book, to call upon the author of the book, who's the one we really came to hear, Joan Zawatzky. And if I might, I'll just read out the intro, if that's all right. I'm sure many have read it, but I think it's important. Joan Zawatzky, who was born in South Africa, after completing her studies, first in art and then in psychology, she moved to Australia, where she worked for many years as a counselling psychologist. Though painting remained a hobby, she decided to try her hand at writing. She wrote There's a Light at the End of the Tunnel, a book that she also gave me as a freebie. Once again, I'm a little bit obsessed with that, but I do appreciate that because it helped me in my rabbinic role reading the book, especially that one story about the Jewish family over there, helping people with depression. Very often people go to the rabbi when they've got these issues, and the rabbi has to then refer them on to a professional. But a fascinating book which really does show that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even when we're in a very, very dark place. And she wrote it to help her clients overcome depression. The Scent of Oranges, her first novel. I haven't received that one yet. Oh, I'm terrible. Okay. My congregation never quite got used to me, but they'll have to. That first novel is set in South Africa and was shortlisted for the Australian Books Alive program in 2007, and congratulations for that, Joan. In 2011, she added The Elephant's Footprint to her South African series, and now her fourth book, The Third Generation, is her latest novel. She lives, of course, in Melbourne with her husband. Her husband, I thought, how could Joan miss out her husband's name in the intro? And then I turned over the page, couple, and it said, for my husband, Jaime. And I owe a special debt of gratitude to Jaime as well, because Jaime and I are on a weekly basis in correspondence, because he sends me an email, particular publication, and that email is all the news and schmooze from South Africa. Now, why does Rabbi Glasman, who's in a very anglicised, sure, 5th, 6th generation Australians, care about what's going on in South Africa? Truth is, I don't. But the reason that email is important is because scattered throughout each of those weekly emails, in bold letters, are a series of jokes from a guy named Stan the Shabbos Man. And I then take those jokes and use them from the pulpit. Zawatzky to the podium to please say a few words. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks so much for coming. I'd really like to thank you, Rabbi Glasman. It was an amazing talk about my book. I don't have to say very much after that. I'm so pleased. It's wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to tell you all that yes, I lost many of my relatives during the Holocaust as well. My father, Alfred, or Fred, as he preferred to be called, wouldn't tell me their names or the camps where they were murdered. His family life in Germany was a forbidden topic. In 1934, my mother, Ruth, and my grandmother, Dora, visited our relatives in a little shtetl called Schmallenliken, which was near Tauroggen in Lithuania. My mother told me that all the people there had similar houses and baked the same plum tarts and cheesecakes, but she refused to tell me their names or how they had perished in the Holocaust. Yes, life at home about things like that was very secretive. My father and his 3 brothers were fortunate. 2 of them had already fled from Munich to the USA, but later when my father and his elder brother Ernst tried to join them, their only option was one of the last ships to South Africa, and thankfully they took it. And when war broke out, my father and my uncle immediately enlisted with the South African forces, the Allies, and they were deported to North Africa. Though my father spent 4 years in the desert against the Nazis with only a minor injury, my uncle Ernst was captured and he escaped death by pretending not to understand German and by changing his name from Klopfer to Klopper, which was a popular South African name. Well, people ask me often why I wrote this book and why I set it in Vienna. Well, or Vienna and Melbourne. Well, I was watching TV one night, and it was an open-air concert at the magnificent Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, and as the orchestra played that wonderful tune, The Blue Danube, I glanced at the audience. I couldn't help wondering if they were the children and grandchildren of Nazis during the war. And I thought of the stories that my friends' Viennese friends had told me about glorious Vienna of their youth, the coffee houses, the rich cultural and religious life there. And then after that, the Anschluss and the horror that followed, the destruction of the synagogues, Jewish shops, and eventual rounding up of the Jews who were sent maybe to Theresienstadt, concentration camp. I had already been thinking of writing about this period and had been doing a lot of research on the subject. The concert was my trigger. I went straight to my computer and began the first chapter. I knew I had an important message to tell, but I didn't want to write another book filled with facts everyone knew about. They cried and then they were so upset that they tended to put the book down. I wanted to tell my story from a grandchild's point of view and for readers of all denominations. My intention was to draw readers into an interesting story about a woman who felt lost, and then shake them with what happened during the Holocaust. And in my psychology practice, I came across people in my age and younger who were still affected by the trauma of the war. And I was writing about them too. And as I wrote, a character, Ella, emerged. And she was Jewish, but she knew nothing about her background, as Rabbi said. And then the other character, Luke, appeared. He was a German Catholic. And he and Ella became childhood friends. And later on in life, while they were still together, he discovered that his grandfather was a prison guard at a concentration camp, and he was overcome with guilt and shame, and at one stage he even contemplated converting to Judaism. And this does happen, as you probably read about. Ella's search for meaning and her eventual understanding of what it was to be Jewish, and her need to pass this on to her children, are the main themes of the book, as you said, Rabbi. And I hope that the third generation will be enjoyed by many, and that the important message of what happened 70 years ago continues to be remembered by the generations that follow. So thanks again for coming, all of you, and special thanks to Michael Cohen and the staff of the museum who helped with this launch. And the books, well, they're available over there at a reduced price, and I think of $20. And part of the sale of the book goes to the centre